Botteri.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh White. I'm a general partner at Notion. I'm a former entrepreneur turned investor, founded a business called Message Labs, which was a Generation 1 SaaS company founded in 2000 that we expanded globally, which is kind of relevant to the conversation today. We set up Notion in 2009. We are based in London. We invest across Europe in enterprise SaaS, enterprise software opportunities. So I'm just going to have my panel briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into the subject of global expansion. Robert.
Yeah, hi, I'm Robert. I'm the founder and CEO of MessageBird. So MessageBird provides communication APIs focused on messaging for SMS, WhatsApp, and voice globally.
Great. I am Mike, co-founder and COO of Branch. Branch is a mobile linking and measurement infrastructure for brands, making sure to track their users and improve the user flow on mobile for consumers.
So my name is Philippe Botteri. I'm with Axel. So we're a global venture firm, so we can invest anything from $1 million in an early stage financing up to $100 million in the growth financing. We love SaaS. We have been invested in companies like Dropbox, Slack, Atlassian, DocuSign, MessageBird, and I think Algolia as well that just heard Nicholas speaking. So very happy to be here.
Thanks, guys. So we're going to talk about global expansion, when to do it, how to do it, lessons learned. What I wanted to start with is trying to make sense of and I'm sure a lot of you are in this position of one side, we're told to focus, align resources, that kind of whole laser focus approach. On the other side, startups can be encouraged to go global from day one. It's all about global expansion. It's all about growth. So I'm interested in the tension between the focus and the kind of global expansion. So just wanted to kind of ask the panel, maybe start with Robert. How do you deal with those two kind of competing schools of thought?
Well, I think for us, we were founded out of Amsterdam. So Netherlands is a pretty small country, so we kind of had to go global from day one. So our focus in building our technology out, literally in our first months, has always been like, how do we win the world? How do we go first to Europe, to Asia? So I can't talk for everybody, but for us, it's been top of mind straight away.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, so I think it depends on a few key criteria. Where you're founded, for example, Amsterdam, Israel, those are some great technology hubs, but with a smaller domestic market, versus we're founded in California, so we had all of US and all of North America to go after. And so for us, it was a little bit different in terms of trying to decide, do we go global or do we focus in the US? We started in the US for about a year before we ended up going international. But one of the other key criteria is how easy is it for you to go international? For us, as a SaaS platform, we just found natural organic usage of our technology outside of the US, and that made it a little bit easy. If you're a company like MessageBird, you're facing a lot of regulatory challenges as well as possibly infrastructure operational overhead that might make it a little bit more challenging to go international. But for us, we wanted to dominate not just the US, but all the world, especially Asia and Europe. And it was easy to go because of our type of technology.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I would say to me, I see two different kind of companies. There are companies, I would say like, Atlassian, Algolia, MessageBird, where the product, can be used for companies of pretty much any size. In which case, people can find you on the web, and I think what matters at this point is for you to look like you're global, meaning have your website, everything's in English, and people looking at the website, they can't tell if you're based in Tel Aviv, in Paris, or in Silicon Valley. And these companies are naturally global from start. If you look at Algolia, from the get-go, 50% of their customers were US, 30-something% were Europe, and the rest was rest of the world. So I think that's one model, but you need to have the right product for it. And then there is the other model, which is more, I'm an enterprise SaaS company. I have a product which address large corporation, in which case you need a real sales effort. You need to focus on the geography. And I would say for European founded business, then it's great to have the product team in Europe, but then the first market you should go after is probably the US market, because if you want to be a leader in enterprise software, you need to be a leader in the US market.
Right, okay, so I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. So,
Can I disagree with you a little bit?
Of course
Is
you
that
can.
allowed? I don't completely disagree that the U.S. is an important market, but I do think that growth supersedes everything, and I think the number one thing you should focus on as a founder always is to grow your company. And if that is growing your company in Europe, it is something you should have sort of first focus on, because I also see there's two things that I see go wrong basically. One is founders not thinking big enough. So in Holland, you see a lot of people like, oh, I want to go win the Benelux. Well, I don't know if people here even know what the Benelux is, but it's like Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It's like 3 of the smallest countries in Europe. And the second thing is that people go too quickly to the US and then sort of fail, because the US is a specific market. You kind of have to go there as a founder. I don't know if that's your experience as well, but sort of founders staying in Europe and then going into US. Like I moved to the US, for example, to sort of like go there.
I mean, I totally agree with you. As a founder, if you want to win in the US, you need to move to the US.
Okay,
and that's what we're encouraging our founders to do. I think what I found is, if you take a company like PeopleDoc, for example, which is selling, SaaS HR, software, they started selling in France, but selling in France, and they went to a few million in revenue in France before addressing the US market, but the experience they had in France actually didn't really help find the right positioning for the product in the US, and it took them, some learning curve to make that work. And then they managed it, and they were very successful, and acquired by Ultimate a few months ago for $300 million. So, but I was wondering, if they had moved to the US earlier without having like a few million revenue, I think it would just have accelerated the timeline.
but I think it, like you said earlier, I think to some extent it's down to the product and down to the market that you're addressing, and how manual the sales process and the onboarding process is. So what I mean by that, if the product resides in the cloud and you can actually sell remotely, you can onboard remotely, you can support remotely, then that makes it much, particularly in a more lightly regulated industry, then that means you can go global pretty rapidly. But I think if you need more, kind of manual support, you're selling into the enterprise, so it's kind of higher touch, it's more kind of face-to-face, the product needs a certain amount of support, face-to-face support, then I think in those circumstances, then it is a bigger investment to go into new markets, because you do have to have people on the ground. So do you think that's right? It kind of depends on the business model and the sales process?
Yeah. I don't know. I think as Europeans, we are in Europe at the moment. I just think we should be, Europe has a lot of good technology companies, so I'd just be worried about moving to the US too quickly. Although I do agree that the US is a big market, it's sort of where the money is, it's sort of where a lot of the exits are today. But Europe is Europe has more developers than the US, for example. Europe has operational advantages in terms of expenses. Cost is lower in Europe than it is in the US. So there's a lot of pretty foundational business metrics that I think you can do really well in Europe that you could probably do less good in the US. So I think you should really, to your point, define what it is that you are willing to achieve, and if it's really necessary for you to go there. Because look at Adyen, never went to the US. They have salespeople in the US. They're a Dutch company. They're worth $20 billion. They're worth more than Stripe.
So just picking up on that. So if you're an emerging SaaS business, you get product market fit within your home market. How do you think you then run that process in terms of determining what your next priority market should be? So what does that look like? Because I think that that's an interesting subject to kind of get into a little bit. Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, so we did a couple things, and we made some mistakes along the way. Early on, we didn't really know what we were doing, so the first place we looked was where do we naturally have customers already that just organically found us and ended up using our technology and maybe became paying customers. And that worked well in some regions like India, which is now our second biggest country outside of the US. But it also was challenging because there were some regions where we thought we had really good traction, like Brazil, and then we actually went there, we hired people there, and we found out that it didn't quite have it didn't make economic sense for us to be there, so we actually pulled out. What we've done now over the past few years, and this has worked well for us, is when we start to identify a market that might have good opportunity, we look at a few things. What's the size of the country and the base? How big is the internet penetration? How big is the mobile penetration? And what's the spending power there? Because it really depends on the spending power. And then we send somebody there for 3 months, and they go through a staged approach where they'll first say, stage 1, does this even have potential to be a big market? Stage 2, okay, there's potential, but will people be interested in the technology? And then stage 3, are they willing to buy? So they'll go do our first few sales, and as soon as they pass all those criteria and we start to see traction, then we'll actually say, okay, this makes sense to do an investment, and then we'll start hiring people on the ground, and then that person goes to some other country. And that's working better now than the early stages of just saying, oh, we have customers in Brazil, let's go to Brazil, and then realizing that the investment doesn't make sense.
Right. Okay.
Well, I would say that for me, it really depends on what product and market you're addressing. I think the comments I was making on the US is if you're really an enterprise SaaS, so you're selling SaaS HR, you're selling SaaS analytics, like things that are really address a broad range of industries where at the end of the day you want to be on the top right of the Gartner quadrants, and if you're not in the US, you will never get there. And that's why it's important to get a decent market share in the US, because that's how, at the end of the day, at least that's how it works today. That's how the analysts are going to judge you. Now, what we're seeing emerging in Europe is a set of companies that are really addressing the European market from the get-go, because they are addressing specific verticals that are very different from the US or the Asian market. So an example of a company like this is Doctolib. So it's a company that provide a booking management system for doctors and video conference system for doctors, for telehealth. This is a market that is very regulated, different by country. They're focusing only on France and Germany, and by itself, it's a massive opportunity. Like, you can create a multi-billion-dollar company just addressing these two markets. And they don't have to go to the US, they don't have to go abroad, they just pick the two biggest markets in Europe. Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, there are, I think, products and verticals where just focusing on Europe makes sense. My comment was more, if you want to be an enterprise SaaS company, be referenced in the top right quadrant by Gartner, then US matter.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's interesting though, because like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're in the top right corner of Gartner. Like what matters is growth, and what matters is revenue and how big of a company you can scale. And if I were starting a company in Europe, yeah, I'd look to the US, but Asia is like, we're not even talking about it. I haven't heard Asia mentioned once. And I mean, think about the number of people. You look at India, it was our first international market just by chance, and 1.4 billion people, right? 200 million plus have smartphones, and that's just going to increase over the next few years. Look at the rest of Asia, like China, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, Korea, Japan. These are all massive, massive, massive markets, many, many times bigger than the US, and maybe the GDP is a little bit smaller, but these are the areas that, like, if I was in, let's say I was starting a company in Europe, I would be focused on Asia, actually, before maybe even going to the US, because I don't care about Gartner, I care about revenue. Where's the revenue? And where's the easiest to get the revenue? And in Asia, it's probably easier.
I think every company is trying to realize their potential, but there's different ways of looking at that. I mean, you look at a big market, but then if the costs of entering that market are very significant, then maybe it's not as attractive as a smaller market where you can get in, less, with on a lower investment. So, there's a number of factors playing into it, isn't there? So, but just thinking of that. In terms of the product and the value proposition, how have you found that you've actually had to make changes to the product for different markets, or changes to the way that you actually sell the product in terms of the value proposition and the pricing? How have you looked at different markets from that kind of product perspective?
I mean, for us it's quite complicated because we deal with a lot of fragmentation. So if you think about, we're sort of at the center of how businesses want to talk to their customers, and that's different in different regions. You know, sometimes it's WhatsApp, sometimes it's Line or WeChat or SMS or voice or Twitter, or so we try to sort of facilitate, and each one of them has their own regulatory compliance issues or language barriers or things like that. So the way that we sort of do it is we kind of hustle it in a way. We figure out, we go sort of in the same way that you're saying. We have one person sort of look into the opportunity, the market, what the local regulations are, what it is, and then we just go and do it. Right. And then sort of look for traction. And then if we get traction, we invest more. If we don't get traction, we back out.
Right. Okay. So there's like there's a test period, set yourself some targets, and then if you reach them, then you sort of double down?
Look, the benefit that we sort of had is that we started working for sort of the bigger companies like Uber and Google and Facebook that naturally have a lot of like need in a lot of countries at the same time. So that sort of drove our focus in a way. But at the end of the day, it's about sort of figuring out what market fits and then just expanding.
Right, yeah.
For us, we tried to keep the product as consistent as possible, because what you don't want to be doing is building custom things for each region, and if a specific region that's big enough requests something, then you say, does the rest of the world actually have interest in this? Maybe, maybe not, and then you make the decision whether to invest. Yeah. Pricing's challenging. We haven't necessarily localized our pricing as much as we could have, so that's a project that we're undergoing, but we just started with kind of what we had. Now, when you start entering certain regions or certain countries, Japan being one of them, that's where you really need to focus on localization. And it's interesting now, 4 years later, to be like, man, if we had really built this, our infrastructure and our dashboard and our website with localization in mind 4 years ago or 3 years ago, that would have been amazing, because then we would be able to roll it out. Now we have to go rebuild everything so that we can localize in certain languages a little bit more easily, which is just like a massive project, and it's slowing us down from entering places like Japan. But that's a high barrier to entry, so we're not focused there as versus other countries where English is the top language.
Yeah, so I mean, I very much agree with what you guys said. I think another point which is very important in terms of, it's about tailoring the value proposition in some cases, but it's also about finding the right way to sell and start with the right person. So I mean, we talked about Asia. I totally agree that Asia is a very important market now, and we're seeing a lot more of our companies developing their go-to-market in Asia. I mean, an example is a company called UiPath, which is a leader in robotic process automation. I mean, they had amazing growth from 5 to 200 million in recurring revenue in 2 years. So and they have grown in every market at the same pace. And specifically for Japan, I think what made them successful there was to be able to hire the right person, who was a former CTO of one of the large financial institutions there. He wasn't a salesperson, but he knew all the CTOs, and he was a door opener. And that's finding this right wedge into a market, especially in Asia, and finding that right people, I think is a very key element of success.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yes,
Well,
can I answer one of the questions that's out there if we have time?
Yep.
So one of the questions that I see is, how do you build trust when rolling out to new markets, especially if you're a SaaS B2B company, which requires more trust and implies longer sales cycles? I think the short answer is build the best products.
I think that's true, but I think particularly in a new market, my experience with third-party endorsement is important as well. So you stand on the shoulder of giants, customers, partners, analysts, media, get that third-party endorsement. I think it's important as well.
Yep.
It's a good question.
Definitely a lot of things you just said there. We focused on two key things. Everything else kind of came secondary. One was get somebody there in person on the ground. Having somebody local, even if they're just there for 3 months, they can build those relationships. Much easier to do than when you're remote. And then second, find a big brand or a couple big brands. Give the technology away for free, give it cheap, whatever, but get a couple big logos, because as soon as you have X brand, then everyone else will say you are legit.
You can sometimes do that remotely. See the market
Sometimes,
remotely with some early adopters, and then you've got the momentum going into the market. It can work really well. Anyway, we're out of time. The light's flashing at me. Robert, Mike, Philippe, thank you. Thank you.